Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the changes to ACC in your practice. It's a busy time for you all, so we really appreciate you taking the time to tune in. If for some reason you can't stay for the entire session, a recording of today's session will be made available by the end of the week. Okay, so before we get started, I'll just cover what we're talking about today. So we'll go through a few pointers on how to use GoToWebinar, and then we'll start the presentation. We'll allow some time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. But if you have any questions about the audio or visual connection to GoToWebinar, we'll try and answer those immediately. So using GoToWebinar, you should be able to see GoToWebinar. Sorry, I'm just going to mute that person. You should be able to see the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen there. The orange microphone tells you that you're muted. All audience members will be muted for this presentation. The next icon will either maximize or minimize the screen that you're viewing the GoToWebinar in. We recommend that you keep it maximized. If you've got a question, you can type it where it says enter a question for staff. If it's not answered directly in the session today, we will get to you in the next couple of days to answer what your question was. So I'm Holly Hodgson. I'm the Clinical Product Specialist here at Medtech, and I will lead the main component of the presentation today. And at the end of that, Prashanth Koval, our Product Specialist, and Chrissy Patterson, our Product Manager, will lead our Q&A session. We've just had a few questions from people about their microphones, just reiterating that you'll all be muted for this webinar. Okay, so changes to the ACC components for Medtech32 means that you can now directly submit ACC45s, 18s, and invoices directly to ACC. So this changes quite a few modules that impacts both clinical and administrative and financial roles. So it's really important that all staff are aware of what changes have been made and how it impacts them and where to find any additional resources for their role. I'll cover all of those things today. So first we cover the setup of the ACC vendor ID. This is mandatory in order to send 45s, 18s and invoices directly to ACC. So you can use your, So when you upgrade, a script gets run which copies the ACC provider ID into the vendor ID field. So we'll just go into the staff setup menu here. And under the provider tab. So you can see here the ACC provider number and the ACC vendor ID are the same. This happens automatically when you upgrade. But if you create a new provider after upgrading, then you need to manually copy that ACC provider number and put it into the ACC vendor ID field. You'll also see that there's an ACC vendor ID field in the location settings. Oops, sorry, I'll just go into the location settings. And that one's found under the Codes and Defaults tab here. This is only applicable for practices that have previously enabled and used the ACC e-schedule. If this is your practice, then you need to be aware that the script won't automatically copy those ACC provider numbers into the vendor ID fields for staff, so you need to do that manually. It's very important that you know if your ACC vendor ID field in the location settings is blank, you must leave it blank. Now we'll just go over the digital certificate, so we'll go back into that staff member setup here. To allow practices to send those forms and invoices through ACC's online interface, you need to have a digital certificate configured either in your location setting or your staff setup. Both the digital certificate and passphrase are provided by HealthLink. If your practice has a single digital certificate for a specific location, this needs to be set up in the location settings. If an individual provider has been assigned a digital certificate, that needs to be set up in their staff setup here. To associate the digital certificate in either place, you click on this little orange icon next to the ACC vendor ID field, browse for it and put the passphrase in. So we'll now talk a little bit about ACC contracts and services. This is, I'll talk about this in a couple of different places in the presentation today, but this is probably one of the most important parts of the changes that have been made. So there are two types of ACC contracts. One is a regulatory generic contract and the other is a non-regulatory contract, or sometimes called a healthwise contract. These are found in the staff setup in the same tab here, provider tab, and you can find the provider codes here in this field, ACC provider code. Each regulatory contract has a contract number based on the staff role. So you can see here it says general practitioner and the code is 80. An example is nurses is 56. The regulatory contract numbers are derived based on the ACC provider code of the income provider who is invoicing for that service. So you need to make sure that the ACC provider code is the right code for that staff member based on their provider type. And if you want to, you can change it by clicking on the ellipsis there. A lot of practices have made the assumption that this setup is already accurate, but we really stress the importance of checking this when you do change to the ACC API changes, because these fields haven't been looked at for any invoicing requirements so far, so they may not be correct, and so we really recommend that you go through the staff setup and check they're all right. Non-regulatory contracts are legal contracts between ACC and an organisation that provides ACC services at a defined rate. So non-regulatory contracts are set up by clicking on the icon here that's next to the digital certificate icon. This shows all the ACC services that are configured in the PMS and their contract numbers. If your practice has a non-regulatory contract number for the location, you need to make sure that that's entered in the location setup. Whereas if it's related to an individual, you need to have that set up in their staff member setup. You need to also be aware that if a service code doesn't exist in your PMS, it needs to be set up first with its subsidy rate before you enter the contract number. We have lots of instructions on how to do that, so I'll show you the additional resources at the end of the presentation on where you can find more information on this. Now we'll just talk about the ACC accounts here. So as part of the upgrade, a new ACC account will be created automatically for each ACC vendor ID that's entered in the PMS. So because the staff member will have their own ACC vendor ID in most cases, the ACC account will be created for that specific staff member in their account tab here. These are grayed out automatically to avoid them being removed. For practices that are enabled for ACC eSchedule, the ACC account will be created for the ACC vendor ID in the location setup, and the ACC account will be associated with all staff members that are linked. And you search for your ACC account as you do normally in the F2 search screen. You can then view all claims that are grouped if you open your F6 screen under that account holder account screen. Okay, so just now we'll just talk a little bit about quantity-based services. So ACC invoices require the submission of a billing method for all services that are invoiced. And there are three types of billing methods that they accept: distance, units, which are a flat fee, and time. So currently, if we go into the services, if I open any service here, so currently services in the PMS can be set up as quantity-based, but the billing method wasn't defined. To enable this, there's a new drop-down section here, whereas if I tick quantity-based service, I can select whether it's distance, unit, or time there. As part of the upgrade, existing services that are configured as quantity-based services will have the default selection for the billing method set. All right, so now we will go to creating an ACC45. So open your ACC45 screen and we'll just discuss the changes here. So starting with the main tab, you can now add up to 10 diagnoses at once. That previously was 3. Time of accident here is not mandatory anymore. Under the Work and Referral tab, the employment name and details are only required if the patient is an employee. For all other types of employment, it's optional. And the employment type of shareholder has now been changed to company owner or part owner. ACC have requested that the employer's country and postcode are included, but at this stage it's not mandatory. In the work capacity section, there are extra tick boxes where you can specify how long the patient is unfit for work for, if it's ticked. You don't need to complete that if the employment type is company part owner. You can give a maximum of 14 days off work or on alternative duties. You can also go into further details about the physical restrictions that might apply to the patient if they're on alternative duties. So here you can choose what those restrictions are. The referral section at the bottom is unchanged from the way it was previously. As well as sending the ACC45, ACC also require that certain demographical information about the patient is sent as well. So the release notes on Insight, which I'll show you a bit later on, have the full list of what information is required outside of the ACC45 form and whether or not it's mandatory. So the major change is that the ACC45 form is a one-time submission, so it needs to be accurate before sending electronically. As soon as it's submitted and the status is receipted, you can't edit it at all. If it's rejected, if you park it, or if it's yet to be submitted, you can still edit that ACC45 form. Prior to these changes, you could also change a diagnosis after submitting an ACC45, whereas now you would need to complete either an ACC18 form if you want to change a diagnosis or fill out a change of diagnosis form. The existing ACC45 electronic lodgement utility is used to submit these ACC45, so that's found under Utilities, ACC, and Electronic Forms there. The differences here is that the Settings tab, and other buttons that aren't required have been removed, so it might look a little bit different. Here you can select to send either all the completed forms or you can choose which specific forms you want. Every ACC45 form that's submitted receives a response message, which indicates whether it's been received or not, and the statuses are displayed under the status screen in the ACC45 tab. So just open that. So this is the claim status screen here. And here you can see failed and completed, so the status will display. I'll talk a little bit more about that screen later. We'll just cover creating an ACC18 form. So if we go into the accidents menu, you can see there's an ACC18 form. This has been developed for medical certificates, but the previous ARC18 form has been retained, just in case you need to submit historical ARC18 forms manually. So that's still in the same location. So the injury details tab here, you start off by selecting what ACC45 number this is related to. And then as soon as you select that, it will auto-populate. Sorry, that one hasn't been. Just choose a different patient. Here we go. So once you select the 45 number here, it will auto-populate the diagnosis on the side underneath. And just like the ACC45, you can add up to 10 diagnoses in this screen. You can also choose to delete. You can change the diagnosis and you can select what the primary diagnosis is. We always recommend the most relevant diagnosis is selected, obviously, as the primary diagnosis. The ACC number here you can see is grayed out, so that's automatically generated and it's only displayed once it's accepted, so it's normal that it's grayed out. Under the Ability to Work tab here, you can enter the unfit for work and initial and subsequent restrictions, but you can only enter subsequent restrictions after you enter the initial time restrictions. And where possible, provide further details in the comments field. You can enter up to 3 time periods on one medical certificate. You can't have any overlaps of any dates. So if you haven't completed that correctly, you'll get a warning message and it'll tell you what's wrong. So you just need to follow those prompts if you do get a warning message. The assistance required tab here is where you can specify what assistance the patient requires in order to get back to work. So if you choose yes, then you choose which option is applying in this case. The rest of the tab is optional. The patient provider declaration, here you need to tick the checkbox to show that you've discussed it with the patient and they give authorization, and the date will always default to today's date. Just like the ACC45, certain patient demographics are required in submitting the form, so the release notes on Insight do have the full list of what's required and whether or not it's mandatory. If you're missing any of the mandatory information, you'll get one single warning prompt telling you everything that's missing, so it's very straightforward and intuitive in that sense. As soon as you click OK, the form is submitted instantly, just like the ACC45. If you want to change the diagnosis after you submit that form, then you need to do a new ACC18 form or a change of diagnosis form. If the form is rejected, the reasons for that will display in that claim status screen that I showed you before, but also it will tell you immediately on the provider's screen when they try and submit it. So now we'll go through the change of diagnosis form. So just like the 45, just like the 18, you've got to select which ACC number this is regarding. So you'll see the list of diagnoses here, and just like the ACC18 form, you can add diagnoses. Got an add button at the bottom there. Just resize that. You can delete. You can select which one's the primary diagnosis, and you can add as many as you need to, up to 10. Just like the ACC18, the change of diagnosis number box at the top is grayed out, and the reason for that is the number will be automatically generated by ACC once it's submitted. The ACC change of diagnosis form does not allow you to specify any work capabilities or restrictions. So if that's what you're trying to do, you need to use an ACC18 form. And the patient provider declaration tab here, you need to tick the checkbox to say that the patient's provided authorization, and again, the date automatically populates to today's date. So now we'll talk a little bit, a bit more about the invoicing. This has been probably the most important part and the bit that we've had the most questions about so far. So prior to these changes, the ACC contract numbers, they weren't looked at so much, so there wasn't as much of an emphasis on the income provider when you're doing an invoice. So if I bring up my invoice screen, all practices have a different way of doing this. But the provider and income section, this is what we're talking about here. So with these changes, ACC is checking that the income provider and their associated contract number matches the service you're invoicing for. So the most common scenario that's being impacted by this is where your income provider is going to point to the GP, but on this invoice, you're invoicing for a nurse consultation instead of a GP consultation. So that will get rejected because ACC now is looking at the income provider and what their contract type is, a contract number is, sorry, and what the invoice you're trying to service you're trying to invoice for. That's why when we talked initially about the staff member setup, it's crucial that you check all of your staff contract numbers, provider types, make sure they're correct, and then make sure that their income isn't pointing to someone who has a different contract number in their accounts tab. So I'll just close this screen and go into the staff member setup here. And in the income tab here, if you do have this pointing to a nominated provider, if they have a different contract number, which is associated with the provider code down here, that won't work. we will have time to answer your questions about this at the end of the session. So to the invoice screen, you can use the annotate invoice section here to put any purchase order numbers in and click OK to save that. And then we just talked a little bit about this before, but if you go into your claim, if you want to check your claims for each provider, you can go into the account holder account screen when you're in, if I open that ACC here, and this is the screen, you can see all the claims in here. If you double click, you can open that claim and see what's in here, and here are your unfinalized. You can transfer the patient or the account, and here you can see who the service is for, who the income is for, and any other notes that will pop in. You can see their vendor ID and their contract number as well. You need to decide, when you're viewing claim files, you need to decide if you're wanting to view it by practice, i.e. there's a common bank account that ACC pays into for the practice, or an individual provider. So there are detailed notes in our release notes on this in our Insight customer portal, but just a quick note on that. If you're wanting to do practice grouping, you need to make sure that at a location level, so we go into your location settings, under the codes and defaults tab, you need to make sure that practice grouping is selected. But if you're going to do that, then you need to have a location level vendor ID number and digital certificate, and you may not already have that. So if that's the case, you need to first discuss that with ACC. If you have provider grouping, then that will obviously group all of the claims per provider in that screen. We also have a handout, which I'll just bring up on the screen to show you, but this is available for everyone to see, which is just giving you a few pointers on how to set, if you're getting rejections or having issues. It's just a quick reference guide. I'll just make sure that's coming up on your screen. There it is. On how to avoid ACC invoice rejections due to that nominated provider issue. So this sheet here we can provide, I think that's on our Insight customer portal, but I'll check that with Chrissy when I unmute her. And it just gives you some things to check and what we've discussed today, things to go over and make sure that they're entered correctly if you are having any issues with your claims there. So on our Insight customer portal, which is found at insight.medtechglobal.com, you can find the Downloads New Zealand button and go to Medtech32 Training Guides and Manuals, and you'll see at the bottom there Medtech32 ACC API integration. So that is where you can see all of the webinars, whether you want to view individual webinars which goes through that specific workflow, or whether you want to view the user guides themselves and any other additional resources. They're all found under that section. I can see that we've had quite a few questions. So what I'll do is hand over to Chrissy and Prashant. First need to unmute them. Chrissy, Prashant, can you guys hear me all right?
Yep, I can.
Yep, I can as well, Holly.
Great, so I'll just change back to the PMS so you can actually demo for the questions, and Prashant, they'll give you control.
Okay.
So that concludes my presentation. Now I'm sure we've got lots of questions about this, so I'll hand over to you, Chrissy, to answer those questions.
Sure, Holly, do you just want to bring the PMS back up on your screen? There we go. Okay, right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through the questions that have been asked during the webinar presentation that Holly just completed, and Prashanth will go through and answer some of those questions, and where necessary I'll jump in as well and help him out a bit. So one of the first questions that we've been asked is what about the nurse practitioners in terms of their provider code? Where would they enter that and how would that be recorded?
Okay, so for nurse practitioners, like if you go to your staff setup, double click, go to your provider. So if you could see over here, like all the contract setup. So nurse practitioners will have a contract number, which is regulatory contract number 56A. So this is the one. So if you use that, that'll be the nurse practitioner contract number. And for nurses, this is 56, and for nurse practitioners, it's 56A. So you just have to select that. And if you have a nurse practitioner at your practice, just select that for setting them up.
Cool, thanks, Prashant. So the next question here is around if we have a HealthLink certificate for the entire medical centre, do we need to upload it into each provider's setup?
No, that's not required. Like so, mostly around 98%, I can say, like across the whole New Zealand, like they'll have like every practice will have a individual digital certificate, which is at the location level, which is shared by everybody in that practice. So only scenario where you have to set digital certificate at a staff level will be like where you might have a just common single staff in a practice and he just have his own digital certificate. In that case, like, yeah, you can set that up at this staff level, but most of the scenarios you have to set this up at the location level.
Cool, thank you. And how do we know if we have a regulatory or a non-regulatory contract?
Okay, so so regulatory and non-regulatory, if say like you have a non-regulatory contract, ACC would have already sent out like notifications to each and every practice through emails. So like they have a contact details, like if like so they would have sent it to you, like saying like, hey, you have a non-regulatory contract number with us, and this is your number. So in case like say most of the rural GP practices, urgent care practices, these are the type of practices who will mostly have a non-regulatory contract number. In case like say you are one of these non-regulatory contract providers and you didn't receive a mail from ACC, in that case it might be possible that they sent out the email to a staff who may not be working for you anymore, or like or to a staff like which the email is not valid anymore or something. But they have tried contacting almost all medtech practices, including Medtech32 and Evolution, and they've sent out communications across. So like if say like you didn't receive this email, you can let us know and we can then like take this forward with ACC as well, so that you can receive your numbers properly. And like so another difference is like the regulatory contract numbers are these, like your 80, the whole list over here, these are your regulatory contract numbers. But non-regulatory contract numbers, like you don't have to use these, you need to go to your location setup. Codes and default, and if you open this screen here, so it'll load all the services like which is there in your database. And say like for rural GP, like you need to enter the number into all your rural GP services. Like same with urgent care, like you just like you need to check like which one is your rural GP services and which one is your urgent care services, and accordingly you just enter like say RP01 from here, the rural GP services starts. So you just have to enter, like there'll be a unique number given, so it might be like say ABC 123. So you just have to copy that number into all your rural GP services. So it's just a one-time setup you need to do, and once you save that in your location settings, like that's saved, like you don't have to tinker with that again. Like it'll be like we'll take your number directly from here whenever you invoice using this particular service. So that's your main thing, like about your regulatory and non-regulatory contract numbers.
Okay, thanks for that, Prashant. So the next question that we have here is around postcodes, and that ACC forms are not being submitted because of a postcode error. can you just run through the error relating to postcodes and where practices need to check that they have a postcode entered for submitting the forms and claims?
Yep. So like only two scenarios where the postcode is mandatory. One is like if the patient doesn't have the postcode either in his normal F3 screen, like the main tab, or like if he has a separate postal address, then you need to ensure that like the postcode is available in that postcode, like, you know. So I'll just take a patient here. Let me see, Sherry. So F3. So your postcode should be either here, like if he has a main residential address, or like it should be under your like separate. If they have a separate postal address, you need to ensure that postcode is here under this postcode. Like so, if it is not there, and if like say you're creating a new ACC45 form for this patient, like it'll provide a warning prompt. Like say I'll just quickly show you. So if I try to save this form now, like I should get a warning about a missing postcode under patient. So like similarly, like say provider level, like we check the same thing at the provider level as well, like the postcode is mandatory. So the provider level, like we look at the postcode under the location settings, like not at the staff settings. So you just have to ensure that under your location, like you have a postcode entered for this like detail. Like over here, there's a postcode. So that's why you didn't get the missing entry there, warning entry. Like but if you didn't have this postcode at the location settings, then you'll get a warning message like when you're trying to submit the ACC45, so that like you fix that issue and then you can submit the 45 form.
Great, thanks, Prashanth. So the next couple of questions have been related to the ACC18 form and also using it through BPAC, which is an online web form. So I can answer the question there. People have asked whether it's still a requirement to use the BPAC form or whether they can continue using it through BPAC. So the use of the ACC18 form inside Medtech32 is optional for practices. We've never had the capability to submit an ACC18 form before, and we have implemented it as part of the ACC API integration. So you can use it through Medtech32 if you want. If you do use the ACC18 form through BPAC currently, you can continue to use it that way as well. So you can choose either option, whatever is most convenient for your practice. The next question that has been raised is around invoicing. So the question specifically is, if a patient has been seen by both the nurse and GP for the same injury, should we be doing 2 invoices separately rather than 1?
So in this case, like so previously were you claiming for 2 services separately, say like so when you say injury, it'll be common ACC like, you know, you would have raised an ACC45 for that. Like so if a nurse can claim for that service which is being provided, so definitely it has to be raised by a nurse as a separate service, and GP should be raising it as a separate service in a different invoice, because if you raise both the services under one invoice, the income provider over there can either be a GP or a nurse. In that case, like if it is a GP, then the nurse's service will be rejected. So if say like to avoid this, you need to raise 2 separate invoices, like one for the nurse as the income provider and one for the GP as the income provider.
Great, thanks, Prashant. Okay, so the next question here is, can you give me the website again for the webinars? So I can answer that one. So all of the information relating to the ACC API changes is available on our Insight customer portal. So that's insight.medtechglobal.com. And you will get a copy of this presentation sent to you, so the information will be available there. There is information in a number of different places. So information under the downloads section where the version 22.20 upgrade is, we have provided links to all of the webinars, the quick start guides, the release notes, the one-page documents like what Holly just showed you before relating to the nominated provider claiming. They are all available directly from the download links. You can also go to the Medtech32 webinars section, and the information is available there, as well as the training guides information as well. So there's a section there on the ACC API integration as well. So we've got it in multiple places, but it's all on that insight.medtechglobal.com page. Another one for you, Prashant. How do you resend a failed ACC45 form?
We have a under accidents, like if you go to the claim status screen, this over here will tell you like exactly what happened to your form. So like if say like the form has failed, then you can you can resubmit it like again. Only thing is like you need to ensure that this is again turned to a completed status. So first of all, you need to check why it has failed. So the reason will be provided once you submit the form to ACC. In this box here, like the reason will come through like why a particular form has failed. If it says like the number provided is already available with ACC, or some other thing like where like something is missing, or like so you just fix that. And one of the things like you could do like to make that into a completed status, like you fix it and then like it will become completed and then you resubmit it, like so if it's very important that the status is changed to a completed status. If it is still in fail, like you cannot submit it, like so that's the reason like I'm like you need to fix the issue like within the form and then try to resubmit it. If say like there was some other reason like where due to a gateway timeout or something and you couldn't submit the form, in that case like you can just double click on the on that particular entry. Second for me somehow. And all you need to do like in that case like you just put a full stop or something in one of these injury cause or somewhere, like and then once you save that form, like it will turn into a completed status.
Okay,
so that will become completed. So then you can submit it, like so either you fix the issue and submit it, or like if say a gateway error, you just put a full stop in any of your forms somewhere and then like save that and then change it to a completed status and submit it.
Great, thanks, Prashant. What about a nurse practitioner working in an urgent care clinic? Is there any specific requirements that need to be configured or set up for that scenario?
No, like if say nurse practitioner, urgent care clinic, in this case, like everybody will have a unique non-regulatory contract number. So if that's the case, like say if it is a non-regulatory contract number, then the whole contract number is taken from the location settings what you set up in under there, like the one I was showing you. So it doesn't matter whether it's GP or nurse or whoever is claiming, the contract number will be always like the same number for them, like so in this case like the contract number, because all the services will share the same unique non-regulatory contract number. So I'll just show you like the one which I was telling you, right? Like say like over here, like say if somebody is using a the rural GP like, or like let me see if there is an urgent care. I don't think an urgent care service is available in this database, but like I can, like the rural GP example I was providing, earlier. So if say like everybody is using the same, like both nurse and GP or like nurse practitioner, they'll be all using the same like the service, same say RP04. In that case, like the contract number will be always ABC123 for them. Like it won't take it from the regulatory contract number, which is 56A or 56 in that case, because they have a non-regulatory contract. So this will become the ABC123 will become the contract number for them. So in that case, like everybody will have the same non-regulatory contract. Like it will be coming up under the account. Like when you submit it, like when you finalize the claim, it will be the vendor ID underscore this particular ABC123. So that's how it will be like. So you don't have to in a non-urgent care setting, the urgent care setting, non-regulatory contract number, the 56A and all those things won't matter.
Okay, Prashant, so do the changes in the provider setup mean we no longer need 2 setups for each provider to deal with ACC claims under urgent care contract and GP regulations?
So let me try to understand. So what is the question here? Like
do the changes in provider setup mean we no longer need 2 setups for each provider to deal with ACC claims under urgent care contract and GP regulations?
So if say like this might be a scenario where a practice is having both like GP clinic and urgent care clinic. So if that is the case, like say if you have a urgent care clinic, then you need to go and set that your services, right? Like the urgent care services should have the unique number there. So it all depends, like, and then like if you also have a normal GP clinic, like then you need to ensure that the staff setup also has like the proper regulatory numbers as well. So if you go to staff, like the so I can take any of these, like GB. So under here, you need to ensure this also is configured. So the number that we'll be taking will be based upon the service that you are using for invoicing. So if the service used is for an urgent care service and that service has a non-regulatory contract number associated, we'll take that as the contract number. If say like you're using a GP service and it doesn't have a non-regulatory contract number associated, then we'll come and check what is the provider code under here, and this will become the contract number in that case. So it all depends like how the setup has been configured. So if you have a practice which has both, then you need to ensure this is set up, and as well as the non-regulatory contract number has been set up under the service. Then only we'll be able to take that properly for you.
Okay, cool. So there's a question here around what does ACC API connectivity mean? So just as an overview, ACC have provided to all PMS vendors a number of API endpoints to connect to. And what it means is that we no longer need to use HealthLink to send your claims or your forms or anything to them anymore, and everything goes directly and straight away through to ACC through their API in a real-time process, and that means that we can give you those immediate responses back to things like your ACC45 forms failing or your claims being rejected because of specific reasons or data missing. So because we have that direct connection to ACC now through those APIs in a real-time scenario, we can provide all of that information to you in a much quicker, more effective manner. So the next question here that we'll go through, let's have a look here. Can you explain how I can get my invoices to present like they used to under one ID code?
So this will be under so you need to have a location settings, like you can contact ACC. So ACC can provide a unique location level vendor ID for your practice. So once you have that, like you just have to go and add that number under the location settings ACC vendor ID. So what it'll do is like, and then like you need to select, so I'll just show you the location setup. So over here, like they'll give a unique vendor ID for your location. So this unique vendor ID will be shared by all your providers across the practice. So currently that's not the case, like where each providers like the ACC provider number becomes their ACC vendor ID. In that case, like every practice, like every GP will have their own vendor ID. Every nurse can potentially have their own vendor ID. But like if you go and contact ACC, they can give you a unique location level vendor ID. You come and set it up here and then select practice grouping. So what that will do is like if say like you have 10 GPs in your practice, all 10 GPs like will be grouped under one claim. Like whatever services they are like invoicing, everything will be grouped under one claim because their contract number will be 80, the regulatory contract number, and vendor ID will be common for them. Like so in that case, like it'll be say ABC, your ACC vendor ID say like ABC123 something. So then it'll be like ABC123_80, and all 10 GPs files will be under one claim file. And similarly, all your nurses like will be under one claim. Like say you have 5 nurses, like so it'll be all under 56 regulatory contract number. So that's a benefit of having a location level vendor ID. But for this, like you need to contact ACC and they can give you your unique location level vendor ID. And once you get that, like you can put it here and then select practice grouping and set it up, and that's it. You're like ready to use it.
Thanks, Prashanth. So the next question here is, why are claims failing where they are having more than 2 numbers in the ethnicity?
Okay, that's kind of like something currently our ethnicity is like hard coded. You cannot like go and add something new to this. Like, you know, we should be using the default ethnicity what is being provided under your patient register for selection. So if say like in cases like where there are ethnicities like which is like more than 2 digits, it might be a case like where your practice would have been migrated across Medtech from another system where it might be using a different kind of like a 3-level or 4-level digit coding, or like something like, you know, where it has come through from other system or something where it has just like, you know, it's not the default like which is recognized by like ACC. So the ACC recognized codes are already there in our system, which is 2 digits. So you need to, if you encounter a case like where it's more than 2, you need to remove that thing and reselect the ethnicity again for that patient. So it's just a data cleansing thing you need to do, like, you know, because definitely ACC will reject like which is not like, you know, it's not like the ones which is recognized by them or by ministry currently, like, you know. So you just need to use the ethnicity which is already provided in our system drop down here.
Okay, so the next one here is, what are the mandatory fields required to send ACC45s that may not already be in the patient registration screen, e.g. occupation, etc.? So the information relating to what the mandatory fields are for both patient and provider and your location are all available in the user guides for this functionality. There's quite a number of them that you need to be aware of, just like that postcode one, which is something that you wouldn't have been used to in the past. So if you refer to the documentation that we have available, it will tell you a list of all of the mandatory fields for both patient, provider and location that you need to be aware of. The next question here is around the update to this ACC API, or version 22.20 being mandatory or optional. So at the moment, you can choose to install this update when you would like to. Obviously, it's part of our upgrade process that you are constantly making sure you're on the latest version of the software. So once you have familiarized yourself with the setup and the configuration and the changes to some of the workflow that Holly has been through today, you need to look at moving yourself and your practice up onto the version 22.20 release. As you will be aware, when we release changes to the software, we're releasing them on the most current version. So you will find your practice becomes out of date relatively quickly as we release new changes in the software, and there's a few updates that are scheduled to come out over the next couple of months with new additional features and functions in the software. I will do, however, let you know that there will be a mandatory upgrade coming in July this year for changes to the immunisation schedules. So you will at some point be forced to obviously go on to their latest release, at which time this ACC API capability will be enabled for your practice. So just keep that in mind, and obviously the sooner you upgrade, the better off and you'll be with in terms of the updates that are coming out for Medtech32. The next question here is around, we've still got time for a few more. So the next question here is around ACC claims. Do we still need to finalize and send via the utilities? So Prashant, you just want to show that quickly?
Yep. So yep, you do have to finalize. Like it's just that where you're going to send is different from the previous thing. Like so, I'll just see if these changes. So like go under message transfer. This is where you need to use. This is the new utility. Like previously, there was like under utilities, like this is where you were sending. Like so, there isn't. We have taken that off. Like you don't have that anymore. So you need to use like message transfer, electronic e-schedule claims. So you do have to finalize, and then once you finalize all the invoices, that is utility, and you can select that like and send it off. So you can
Great.
just so yeah, you can just select that and then submit it, and it'll come. I mean, like it'll be submitted immediately, and in real time you'll find out like whether it's been like it has been successfully received by ACC. And if say it fails, then you can go to your claims like thing, like your claim screen, like claim status screen under e-schedule tab. Like over here it'll have those invoices that were submitted, and the reason for failure will be under this box here.
Okay, thanks, Prashant. So there's just another question just popped up now around the BPAC form. So if you didn't hear the questions earlier, you do not have to inactivate the BPAC ACC18 form. So if you do want to continue using that, you can. Otherwise, you can use the one that we've now got available within the application itself, and the ACC18 that we've provided as part of the API. So I think that's probably all the time we've got questions for, Holly. So if there are a few others, we will come back to them separately after the webinar.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. We'll be in touch with everyone that we haven't answered those questions for. Otherwise, the recorded version of this webinar will be up on our website by the end of the week. All right. So I will end the webinar for everyone now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks, Prashant.
Thanks.
Thanks, Oli. Yes.